Hello to all. I'm here today with the Tier 8 British tech tree aircraft carrier, the HMS Implacable, leader of the Implacable class armored fleet carriers, here today on the map Haven. The mode is Domination, and we are fortunate enough to be in Tier 6 to 8 matchmaking, which puts us as top tier, up against an enemy Graf Zeppelin and a Weser, accompanied by my own Weser. And then in North Carolina, Odin, Colorado, Warspite Ismail, making up the enemy battleship complement. Talon and Miyoko Alba making the cruiser complement, and the Harkaze and Aigla as the destroyer complement. Now the Implacable is considered one of the weaker Tier 8 carriers. Quite possibly one of the weakest, really only vying with the German premium Graf Zeppelin for that spot, given the unfortunate state of both of these carriers. However, unlike the Graf Zeppelin, such as the one on the enemy team, the Implacable at least has some of the versatility offered by high explosive munitions, though this utility is somewhat limited again by their relative inadequacy and inaccuracy. Anyhow, starting the match with the Supermarine Seafires of the Western, just hunting for destroyers, find a Miyoko instead. You'll see overall that it's a fairly beefy squadron for a 6-plane squadron, a 2x3 setup. With those Seafires, fairly slow however, you can see even at full boost, they only achieve a maximum speed of about 180 knots. And they cruise at a relatively pedestrian 139. Still looking for targets, find an Alba instead. I know both destroyers, one spawned center and the other spawned kind of outward on the flank, so I'm just cruising about. Harakaze gets spotted. Extremely low HP destroyer, as you can see with the 1300. Now the reticle has changed since I last covered the Implacable. Changed from that circular reticle over to the kind of elongated Havar reticle. Now each Supermarine Seafire carries just about 10 rockets, so you launch 20 rockets in a 2-plane salvo. Again, 4 rockets hitting. This Harakaze is of course dodging to mitigate much of that damage. But with 2300 hit points, you can see these planes are actually fairly durable, at least as far as Tier 8 aircraft of rocket-type munitions go. Now the reticle change overall is a bit of a nerf, but honestly for the Implacable, which always had relatively unreliable rockets anyway with that circular reticle, was a bit of an upgrade, putting 5000 damage onto the Harakaze, which is not particularly much considering you can deal that much in a single strike if you get a good hit. But for a 13,000 HP Harakaze, that's just about 30 to almost 40% of its total hit point pool, so still fairly substantial. The rockets have about 2300 alpha, which comes out to about just shy of 800 damage per rocket, and 28 millimeters of penetration, which, well, more than sufficient for this kind of matchmaking where we're top tier, makes you unable to penetrate the plating of higher tier battleships, such as this Odin here, which we are striking. We are, however, using the torpedoes on this Odin, so we're not going to have that problem at this present moment. Torpedoes do just shy of 6,000 damage, just about 5,900. They are fairly slow, but they have that converging British pattern, which means that you can get some fairly nasty hits onto targets. Odin does manage to short one of the torpedoes by kind of gliding in toward it. He's nosing out, but thanks again to that converging pattern, should be able to hit him. And just launch early here. Make sure I catch him on the side, hopefully. Torpedoes, again, like all British aircraft, or torpedo aircraft, that is, fairly substantial hit point pool. Torpedoes themselves moving rather slowly, as you can see. My last torpedo plane does go down, but not before releasing its payload, scoring us a 4th and final torpedo hit. Enemy Aigla over there, so I'm going to relaunch my Seafires rather than using my level bombers. The level bombing squadron was recently buffed on this patch, of course. We are on patch 6.10 at this present moment. They received a little more damage, but they are unsuited for anti-destroyer work, thanks to the large reticle size and the unpredictable launch pattern. My destroyer ally is going to go down, and with that goes my proxy spawning. But the Igla has fairly minimal AA. I'm looking to see if I can get any information about his relative location from those torpedoes, but don't see anything, so I'm just going to leave a fighter and deal with that later. Now again, I mentioned the rockets only have 28mm of penetration, which means that you do not penetrate battleship plate. However, all superstructure reaches a peak of about 19mm of armor, so should be able to get some nice accurate hits. And you can see that Havar reticle does allow some good range of spread. You can see here my carrier was detected by aircraft. Fighter spotting that Igla as he takes a Western torpedo. My Alba under quite a bit of harassment. Notice the ferry Spearfish is the carrier for both the torpedo bomber and the level bomber. The alpha damage of each bomb went up by 200, which translates to roughly 70 damage, a little bit less actually. And you received an extra 1% base fire chance, so in the case of my Implacable build, which is taking Demolition Expert, I got bumped from 33 to 34% fire chance. Now these bombs only have 32mm of penetration, so on a German ship like this Odin, which does have 50mm middle deck sections, you are going to get a fair amount of shatters, which is one of the major problems. Even the Audacious at tier 10 only maxes out at about 41mm of penetration. You can see there's quite a bit of drop level bomber kind of lag time, and even though I'm dropping 12 bombs, they are spread over an extremely wide area, so as a result, they do tend not to get a very good spread. The fighter tags me rather quickly there, so I'm only able to drop one bomb, but again you can see of the bombs I'm striking, a good portion of them are shattering, unfortunately. I'm going to launch my Seafires again, not because it's an ideal aircraft, but because I want to kind of keep my squadrons regenerating. Another problem with the Implacable is of course her mediocre regeneration times, something that kind of gets glossed over because people just worry about her overall efficacy in terms of her munitions, but more problematic than that of course is the fact that her aircraft, while being quite durable, are not very numerous in number, and they regenerate fairly slowly. Team kind of throwing their lives away, getting chewed up quite a bit. Looks like on the other side they kind of tried to push down into that cluster of enemy ships, and as a result met a rather ignominious end. Gonna go after this Tulanin because, well, he's alone and fairly low, and I can penetrate most of his hull. Tulanin does have some icebreaker streaks. Okay, he's actually quite close to enemy carriers, so I'm actually gonna divert and hit this Graf Zeppelin. Holding down on the air brake, you can see that Seafire can get quite slow. Durability allowing me to tank through the fighter long enough to deliver my rocket munitions, scoring a nice 13 out of 20 rockets onto that Graf Zeppelin. My Massachusetts pushing quite consistently into this enemy fire. I'm gonna drop a fighter in the middle of this formation, nothing special about Implacable fighters. You can see cruising, even at maximum speed, the level bomber is not particularly fast at 169 knots of speed. Looking to make a drop on this North Carolina, my team continues to bleed ships in the north. This enemy Graf Zeppelin is fairly vulnerable. Again, fairly good HP pool on the aircraft, but there's only 6 of them in the squadron. Do manage to set fire, but I get 6 shatters in spite of the 2 fires against the North Carolina's 38mm middle deck, which is unfortunate. Kind of diving in with last gasp onto this Graf Zeppelin. The level bombers do good damage, but Thanks to the slow speed, it can be difficult getting the planes onto the target, as you can see there. Did score a double fire, thanks to that relatively good fire chance, but the large amount of shatters against that 38mm middle deck section is obviously disappointing. Graf Zeppelin going after my Albemarle, which has decided that he'd rather sit flat broadside against an enemy Talonin than actually maneuver. Obviously unfortunate. Gonna try and light that Graf Zeppelin up again with a fighter, but gonna go after that North Carolina because he uses damage control. You can see I do have to stack fires and floods in order to really get effective damage, but because of the overall slow speed of my planes, in spite of their tankiness, they are not particularly effective at delivering damage, which is one of the Implacable's key problems, which kind of makes her stand out from amongst her tier 8 peers, because most of the tier 8 carriers are excellent at delivering damage. Do manage to score a flood, thankfully. Converging torpedoes just catching the North Carolina on the stern. Don't have enough plane HP in spite of those tanky planes to punch through to reach the Graf Zeppelin, so I'm going to stay onto this North Carolina, try and deliver as much alpha damage as possible. Running out of teammates to expend. You can see on the other side there's been quite a substantial push. Farming a bit of flood damage, gonna push downward. He has either damage controlled or the flood has run out, one of the two. Gonna defend this Massachusetts, which is spearheading. And you can see that poor regeneration time resulting in me not even being able to field a full squadron at this stage of the match. We're about to find out if the North Carolina has fielded a damage control. Even if he hasn't, or even if he did though, because the planes are so slow, it is likely that he will have it up again. Losing a plane on the way in. Again, 5 shatters on that middle deck. Do score a fire. He does appear to be ticking, but he's also ticking a North Carolina heal, which is a substantial heal, popping my attack here to dodge flak and also get that damage reduction. Do lose a plane on the way in, and with only 1 bomber, the 6 bombs are unlikely to do that much to him. Do get my full 3 penetrations, but you can see he is healing a ton of HP. Caps are ticking in our advantage, but we are severely disadvantaged in terms of ship count, and like I said, my reserves are not doing particularly hot. Those rocket planes having quite a field day. My Massachusetts is reversing. I'm gonna have to try and slip behind. Now there is the advantage of having relatively short arming distance on these British torpedoes. On a Japanese torpedo, especially one like the Kaga, for example, which has a very long arming distance, I might not be able to score this hit. He's turning out and away, so I'm gonna have to try and use that converging pattern to make sure I get that intercept. Do manage to score a flood, which should be lethal. Gonna guarantee the kill though. Oh, he actually has damage control, so good thing I came in. He is dead now, so now I can recall. And gonna go after the enemy carriers at this point. Pushing my hull forward, I have an armored deck, unlike most carriers at this tier, which means I'm actually extraordinarily resilient. I'm gonna pre-drop this squadron. Start putting damage onto this vulnerable western hull. Okay, I sectored the wrong side, but it's just a single Graf Zeppelin fighter pushing into the enemy home cap here, because even though I don't have secondaries at this point, it is fairly important that we get some ships back. So getting the 2 carriers out of the game, which are fairly durable opponents, will be a good start to that. Weather AA denting my planes in spite of their relative durability. You can see that having extra HP doesn't really matter when you're really slow. He's reversing, which makes him an easy target. Again, gonna use my substantial hit point pools to punch through. launching rocket planes, we're gonna chase that Graf Zeppelin. Score a Wesser frag. Some clean carrier-on-carrier combat. I might tag this fighter, and indeed I do, but I'm close enough to my hull that I can just rely on my hull to shoot down that fighter for me. Once I get to the Graf Zeppelin, however, there is going to be a self-defense fighter once more. Don't want to actually extend too far into the cap. You can see enemy ships pushing. Oh, I was supposed to pre-drop. Well, don't have time for that anymore, so now I'm just committed. So since there's a fighter here, I'm losing 2 more aircraft than I was supposed to. But can't worry about that. Sometimes, even though there is a correct play and an incorrect play, you have to just go with what is available, because in this case I'm trying to commit to getting a kill as soon as possible. My allies are actually working on that Colorado, so there's a good chance I might divert for him. Now I have an armored deck, but there are sections of armor which don't resist the 40mm penetration of the rocket planes of the Graf Zeppelin. So unfortunately, I'm going to take some amount of damage here. I am able to put another 16 rockets into him this time. I think I'm going to divert onto the Colorado temporarily, if only to help us keep this cap in our hands. And hopefully finish off that Graf Zeppelin later. Colorado is turning in response to the Western torpedoes, so hopefully I can score mine. Now unfortunately I'm gonna have to split my focus between the Odin and the Colorado, which is not great. He's turning in here, so I'm not gonna have a great angle. But I'm just here to farm defended ribbons. Do you score a hit here? Hopefully I can finish off that Colorado, I'm not sure though. So I'm sending the level bombers to Colorado covered with 25mm armor. Means that I should be able to score some hits. I'm gonna hit the Colorado and then swing downward onto the Graf Zeppelin hull. He doesn't have enough armor to resist these 32mm penetration bombs. So already swinging downward. Hopefully I score enough bomb hits. Alrighty. And now these are actually fairly potent anti-flat top, so anti-carrier munitions. But because they're so slow, there's a good chance of the fighter intercepting you if you're not careful. Hopefully this should be enough to finish a 6K carrier. Not quite. Oh, there we go. I am broadside to that Odin. Drop a fighter. Gonna go after this Odin for my last kill. We're at 900 points, so when the Odin drops, which he should to this Wesser army, looks like he's gonna take both from the Wesser. That should end the match, so just shy of Kraken, but you can see top tier, the Implacable, can still perform extremely well, especially when you bully the right targets, such as a soft-skinned carrier. Nothing in the way of achievements this game, although my pushing my hull into the 2 carriers obviously caused them a little duress, so I did end up with an AA defense expert, which is fairly funny. 32 hull kills and 6 fighter kills, however, will show you that it's mostly just self-defense hull AA, rather than my fighters that are doing any particular interdiction. 141,000 damage, 16 torpedo hits, 32 bomb hits, 2 incapacitations, 4 kills. Could have picked up that 5th kill, but the Wesser did clean up the game, and honestly, that Odin could have killed me because the Implacable has a fairly raised citadel and I wasn't fully in cover, so it's probably better that way. 9 kills, 4 floods, 7 defended ribbons, 1 solo capture, 10 spotting ribbons, and 76 rocket hits. You can see top tier, you make use of all your munitions fairly well, especially the rockets. Team score wise, 2,800 base experience, so almost 1,000 above the next person, so a fairly impressive Implacable performance overall. Damage wise, mostly heavy ships, but honestly, a lot of my damage came from fighting those 2 carriers at the very end. The bulk of my alpha damage coming from my torpedoes, And then in this case followed by the rockets. I did not reach for the bombs that frequently, and a lot of the times that I did, I was attacking the North Carolina, and as you saw, the North Carolina shattered many of my bombs. 17 bombs hit, but he took only 9k bomb alpha, and with a 5100 bomb alpha, each bomb should be hitting for about 1700. So if you multiply 1700 by the 32 bombs that he received, well, let's just say he did not, or sorry, if you multiply 1700 by the 17 bombs that he received, let's just say he took roughly a quarter of the damage that he would have if he was taking full damage. So you can see how any amount of armor that shatters the 32mm penetration bombs quickly reduces its damage potential. Dot-wise, we did get a good amount of dot, just about 23,000 damage, but as I mentioned, the slow nature of the planes does keep you from being able to effectively stack dot damage that well. In terms of aircraft loss, you can see we did lose a large amount of our aircraft complement toward the end of the match. We were running out of level bombers, and we were on the last almost full squadron of torpedo bombers. So in spite of these tanky planes, you still basically lose the same amount as any other carrier. And it's not as though you have particularly heavy hitting munitions. The rockets themselves, as I said, also lack penetration. The torpedoes are very good. Probably the best squadron of the Implacable, certainly the most reliable, but they're relatively slow speed, and more importantly, the slow platform that they're carried on. You can see the torpedo planes only reach 172 knots at maximum boost, does limit their overall utility. Long regeneration times, you can see well into the minute, over the minute-and-a-half mark actually, for many of these. Just about a minute and a half for torpedo bombers, and about a minute 46 for the bombers. Even the rocket planes take 90 seconds to regenerate, and honestly their damage output is not particularly high. Now hull-wise, the Implacable is an armored carrier, but unlike most of the tier 10 carriers, it's not a uniform armored deck. There's still an area of notable vulnerability on the bow and stern, and of course the island conning tower. The middle deck, however, is 38mm, so that will shatter most munitions. The 40mm Graf Zeppelin rockets, however, will penetrate that, and the central strake of 76mm. So this armor deck overall is very good at protecting you from armor piercing and high explosive at long range. But at close quarters, once people start getting access to your side plate, you can see the side plate is not particularly well armored. So this is really only an effective resistance against low to medium caliber, high explosive at long range, and armor piercing at long range. Kind of keeps you from getting carrier sniped by any of those 899 divisions to some effect. If any shells plunge through your butt, you're still going to take damage, or if you're broadside, you're still going to take damage. But it does provide some resistance. So you end up being a fairly durable carrier in terms of your 55,000 hit points and 34% torpedo ballage. Note, however, that your citadel is raised and stepped, so if you take citadel damage, you will take large amounts of damage at once, so it's definitely not recommended that you put your Implacable under heavy fire. Just like all aircraft carriers, she is going to go down. Now I did talk about the aircraft complement pretty in depth throughout the game, but outside of the long region times, the HPs are all good. As I mentioned, 2300 on the fighters, 2350 on the torpedo bombers with the heal, and with my buffed bombers, 2600. So if you compare that to the kind of middle of the pack Lexington, you can see you have a substantial leg up on the Lexington's Corsair attack aircraft. However, the Corsairs have a 3x3 setup with a 2000 damage rocket, so slightly less damage per rocket, but those rockets have 33mm of penetration, which means they can attack carrier plating. As well, that 3x3 squadron does launch a couple more rockets, 24 compared to your 20, and they actually pen things, so the extra plane of adding a density does contribute to that munition being quite a bit better as well. Unlike that 180-ish knot top speed, the Corsairs reach a peak speed of 214 knots and cruise at 173, so substantially higher cruising speed and still higher boost speed. Unlike the 90-second regen of the rocket planes as well, you have a 60-second regen, so a 33% decrease in regeneration time, so you have many more of these Corsairs available in spite of their lower HP, and they get onto the target much faster, which is better for stacking fires. 20,080 on the torpedo bombers, unlike the 2350 on your torpedo bombers, but each torpedo hits for 400 more. It's a 3x3 setup, which means you're putting one whole extra torpedo into the water. At the same time, speed is comparable this time on the Helldiver, but the regeneration time is 72 seconds as opposed to 89, so still better regeneration time. And then if you go to the bomber, first thing you need to pay attention to outside of that slightly lower HP and similar cruise speed is the penetration. So if you see HE or armor penetration capacity, 53 millimeters of armor penetration, which basically allows the Lexington to attack any target other than turret plating, so the turret on the top of the armor on the top of gun turrets, or very specific ships like the Sovietsky Soyuz and the Kremlin, which have 60mm mid-deck. Even German battleships will take damage from that kind of penetration, and then a whopping 57% fire chance, and each plane carries 2 bombs in a 3x3 setup, which means you're dropping 6 bombs with a 9,000 damage alpha with a much more precise reticle of the HEDB. And unlike that 104-second regeneration time, they regen in 69 seconds. So you can see that overall the Lexington has a much more well-suited complement of aircraft, and that's just the average regeneration carrier. So in comparison, the Implacable is unfortunately quite a bit weaker. Her concealment is also fairly substantial, so is the Lexington's, but at least the Implacable has armor. I don't have concealment expert yet, which is something you do end up taking, but you do end up hovering at about 12.9 concealment, which is still fairly high. Having said all of that, module-wise, fairly straightforward. Slots 1 and 2 are the 2 aircraft upgrades. You can't take anything else for aircraft, so why bother? So aircraft mod 1 and aircraft engines 1. In slot 3, I'm currently taking aerial torpedoes as well as torpedo acceleration on my captain. You can opt not to take torpedo acceleration on your captain and get slightly shorter arming distance, although you will shave your torpedo speed down from just about 42, so you'll drop to 37. It's kind of up to you what you want. The other options for this are either torpedo attack time, but the short arming time, short arming distance nature of the British torpedoes doesn't really let you use that to its full effect. Or you could take attack time, but again, Seafires kind of want to be making attacks in as short burst as possible because they can maneuver so well, so you don't want to actually extend the attack time that much. Unlike something, say, like a German carrier, which wants to kind of hold the attack steady for a long period of time, and then secondaries on the Implacable are fairly bad, so overall I'd rather just take this module and get the extra speed. Slot 4, I'm taking bombers modifications. It's the same general gist as any carrier where I take bomber health. The torpedo bombers have access to a heal, and the level bombers spend the most amount of time over the target anyway, and they have the most base health, so why not up that bevy of HP by getting the extra 7.5%. And last but not least, as I mentioned, the aircraft servicing time is already pretty horrible, so improve the servicing time and get extra planes on deck without servicing. Without this slot 5 servicing module, you only have 9 rockets and 9 level bombers to start with, and 12 torpedo bombers, which is not a lot at all. Moving on to my captain build, I'm running a 15-point captain. This is basically a full build Implacable or Audacious captain. I'm just missing concealment expert. But anyway, for the core 9, the universal core 9 skills are air supremacy, improved engines, aircraft armor, and survivability expert. However, on any carrier where you might want to take torpedo acceleration, the Implacable being one of them with its slow 35 base speed. Torpedoes, I end up taking torpedo acceleration first, so the core 9 becomes this triangle here. Go down this line, then stop for survivability expert, or you can just take survivability expert first. These are pretty much equivalent. After that, follow it up with plane speed, or if you didn't take torpedo acceleration, follow it up with plane torpedo acceleration. Then go on to demolition expert to get some extra fire chance out of your bombs and rockets. You have HE bombs, HE rockets, so pretty much a no-brainer to dig Demolition Expert, especially as a damage over time carrier in some matches. After that, followed up with Concealment Expert, and then finish off with Last Gasp. Now, just to maximize my performance as much as possible without having a full point captain, I have gone for Last Gasp before Concealment Expert, but in general, Last Gasp is a luxury skill. It does work a lot better with the Implacable small squadrons, which is why I've opted to take it. But for most people, I would recommend getting Concealment Expert first. It doesn't do too much to benefit your aircraft, or your aircraft will still have that rather large 9-kilometer spotting range after, but it does benefit your hull quite a bit, dropping you to sub 13-kilometer concealment, which is quite a bit more comfortable than the 14.5-kilometer base detection. Anyhow, that was a pretty spicy Implacable game, but we were thankfully top tier. But I will call it here for now. Don't have too much time today. I would have preferred to play in a bottom tier game, so you can kind of see how the Implacable has to struggle a little bit when in bottom tier matchmaking, but that'll have to wait for another time. Anyhow, with that said, I hope you enjoyed, and I will catch you guys all later. Cheers.